Welcome to the Forager Podcast, where I talk with cottage food entrepreneurs about their strategies for running a food business from home. I'm David Crable, and today I'm talking with Rob Sanz. But before we begin, I'd like to thank the sponsor for this episode, Simply Bread. Rob mentioned the Simply Bread oven in this episode, and other guests have mentioned it in the past, but if you haven't heard of it yet, it is a pretty unique oven. It combines traditional baking techniques with cutting-edge technology, so it's both practical and futuristic. You can use it to bake breads, desserts, and more, and it is a workhorse. You can bake up to 15 loaves in just 40 minutes. You can connect it to Wi-Fi, control each of its 3 baking decks separately from each other, plus many more features designed to help you get the perfect bake every single time. And Simply Bread doesn't just do ovens. They have a growing line of high-end baking accessories available because their mission is to make the world's highest quality baking products accessible to everyone. So if you're looking to upgrade your baking game from beginner to professional, they simply have the right products for you. I encourage you to check them out, and I think you will be impressed too. To learn more, go to forager.com/simplybread. All right, so I have Rob Sanz on the show today. He lives in Rockville, Maryland, and sells sourdough bread with his cottage food business, Rise Artisan Sourdough. Rob is a longtime fan of the podcast, but he told me that he doesn't always resonate with guests because many of my podcast guests have gone full-time with their businesses or they're aspiring to. Whereas Rob doesn't want to leave his full-time career and has intentionally kept his bakery small as a result. One thing I love about the cottage food industry is that it can cater to so many different needs, and Rob is a good example of that. In this episode, Rob shares how he's found the right balance between his family, his career, and his growing cottage food business. And with that, let's jump right into this episode. Welcome to the show, Rob. Nice to have you here.
Thanks, David. I'm a huge fan of the podcast, and I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to talk with you today.
Well, I'm glad you're on the show and can share your story. So you kind of know how it works. Can you take me back to the beginning? How did this all get started?
Sure. I've always loved baking. I didn't really get into it until maybe a little later on, after I had gotten married and my wife and I had purchased a home and really started to settle in here was really kind of when my interest took off in baking. I was actually gifted a book from my mother-in-law. It was Ken Forkish's Flour, Water, Salt, Yeast. That was my Bible for a little while I was learning the ropes on, mixing percentages and how to handle dough and all that stuff. I would say for some people it comes naturally. For me, I would say it probably didn't. I would think it had a pretty steep learning curve when I was first getting into it, being able to recognize different stages of the dough, when it's ready, when it's under, when it's overproofed. And so a lot of the early days were just spent kind of experimenting with really no goal in mind, just kind of making bread when I had time. I also at the time had a coworker that found out that I was baking just kind of in passing, and he gave me a recipe for English muffins that he described them as little clouds of sunshine. So he sold me on those, and so I tried those, and it just kind of built from there. It really just kind of started a passion for me. It's one of those things that, I've had a lot of hobbies in my life, but this is the one that just kind of clicked for me right from the bat. And I guess the rest has been kind of history. It's just been building since then.
So about what year would you say that you got really into bread baking?
Well, it was really kind of an infrequent hobby where maybe once a month I would bake for a long time. And then I think like a lot of folks during the pandemic is really, I found myself at home, working from home, and just had a lot of extra time. And it was one of those things where I craved the routine that I was missing during the lockdown. And I started baking every morning just to try to establish some sort of routine. And it really helped at the time just to kind of keep me centered and keep some sense of reality or normalcy in my daily routine.
Yeah, obviously a lot of people picked up sourdough during the pandemic, but it sounds like you had been doing this for maybe many years before that.
Well, I hadn't been doing sourdough, actually. I'd been doing yeasted recipes. And over the pandemic, we had a friend who gave me some of her starter. And again, I'd always actually been intimidated by sourdough in the past because the whole feeding schedule and trying to keep this thing alive and having to feed it every day, even though you weren't baking every day, that didn't really click with me because I was doing it, semi-frequently, not every day. But once you gave me the starter, it kind of just got thrust upon me and I started doing research and the more I read, the more I realized that it really wasn't as overwhelming as I was making it out to be for myself. So I've learned over time that it's really a pretty hands-off thing where if you're going to be baking, you feed the starter a day ahead and it takes all of 2 minutes to feed the starter and then it sits and then it's ready for you. You do have to schedule a little bit when it peaks and when it's going to be ready to use in a recipe. But beyond that kind of scheduling piece, it's really a pretty hands-off process. So from that respect, I was actually able to fit it into my schedule better than like a yeasted recipe because yeast makes the dough rise very quickly. So you have to kind of be on it and babysitting it. And you can miss it if you're a half an hour late or 45 minutes late. So from that regard, I think it's just one of those things that sourdough was actually a little slower and was actually easier to manage and fit into my schedule.
You had mentioned that this process didn't necessarily come naturally to you. So what do you feel like kept you going, or like, why didn't you give up on this? What was, I guess, really captivating about the bread?
There's two things that come to mind. Number one is I love bread. Since I was a kid, I've loved bread. Bread was always served at dinner and in my house, and sandwiches are one of my favorite food groups for my whole life to this day. And then secondly, as I mentioned, I had just kind of been baking infrequently. However, when my wife got pregnant with our first child, she had a pretty tough time in the first trimester with like nausea and not being able to eat much. And the one thing she was able to eat was my English muffins. So during those few months, I was making them like several times a week just to be able to keep up with, she was eating them almost every meal and I had to keep baking them so that we could keep, the stock full for her. So I think those two things just gave me the drive to keep doing it and I wanted to get better at it. The thing about bread baking, it's interesting because even if the proof isn't right or the rise isn't good, the flavor is usually there, especially with sourdough. So it still tasted good. And like I said, I love bread. So I would eat the loaf and have to make another one. And I think from that regard, I just kind of kept doing it just out of, pleasure. It wasn't any sort of need or anything that made me do it besides just like, I liked eating it. And so my family liked eating it and I just kind of kept making it when we ran out.
So needless to say, there were no business ambitions for quite some time here.
Oh, no, not at all. Especially pre-sourdough, there was definitely that was purely just for pleasure and as a hobby and just to stock the freezer for my family. But once the sourdough started, I guess because of the pandemic, I was making it so often that I was getting into a really regular practice of it. And I know that some people might say there's no way I could bake every day. And for me, it was therapeutic to actually bake every day. Like I mentioned, having that routine was something that I kind of latched onto and it's never felt like work for me. It's always felt like a pleasurable thing and something that is therapeutic for me. Just, the stretching and folding and measuring everything, to the right gram. And those are all things that resonate with my brain and have just kind of, brought me joy over the past few years.
Well, so it sounds like by the time you considered selling your bread, you didn't have to learn bread baking. You already knew that. You were doing it on a daily basis during the pandemic. So when did you start to think, well, hey, maybe I could start making some money from this passion of mine?
It was never really in my front view to start a business. It was more, again, kind of baking regularly. And once the idea started to creep into my mind, I started watching the C2 video series from Proof Bread out in Arizona. And he started their business very much on a whim. And there was a local baker that, I believe the story goes that there was a local baker that they enjoyed. And it came time for that baker to sell his business. And they just didn't want to see that product die for that community. So they just took it on really with no knowledge or know-how. And, listening to that story kind of inspired me to say, look, I've got actually a pretty good foundation. I know how to do it. It's not perfect yet by any means. I'm going to have to learn how to scale up because I'm not going to be making one loaf a day. I'll be making probably 6, 8, 10 loaves at a time. So I knew I had a lot to learn on that front, but at a certain point, I just kind of decided that it's something that I thought I could do. And as you know, I have a full-time career that I do alongside with this. And so at the time, it was just a particularly difficult time at my full-time job. And I was looking for an outlet, whether it was creative outlet, whether it was just having control over something that only I had control over and I could do it my way and not have to worry about any politics or any repercussions beyond just not selling bread that day. It was very approachable from that regard because in my regular career, it's much more high stakes. And so it was a different animal. And I guess I was craving just that kind of approachable and smaller scale type of endeavor at the time.
And so what is your full-time career?
I am an architect. And so I work at a medium to large size firm. It's like 50 people. And there's always, a handful of projects that you're managing at any given time, and it can get pretty hectic. And so it's a very complicated kind of busy career path. And again, I think I was just looking for something a little bit more streamlined that I could do on the side as a way to, to keep perspective on things, I guess.
Yeah, I know before the interview, we were talking about how you don't want to leave your career. You enjoy your career and you appreciate having the business be something that you do on the side. So I was just wondering, when you're considering turning your bread hobby into a business, what was the motive for doing that? Was it to try to make some more money, or was it to share your bread more widely? Was it to bake bread more often? Like, what were your motives for starting the cottage food business?
For me, it wasn't really about the extra income. I'm pretty well compensated in my full-time career. There's a lot of benefits that come with it that, the stability, the healthcare, the routine that comes with it. Those are all good things that I appreciate about my full-time career. And that said, it can be stressful. So I think the baking was something I was already doing. And again, going back and watching some of these YouTube videos that some of these micro bakers are making, there's always some form of like community interaction or community impact that they have. And that was very appealing to me. We don't really know a lot of our neighbors and our kids. I've started school at a new school. And so I was really interested in the community aspect, just meeting more people and, sharing good bread with them. And I think there's a lot of appreciation, at least from the folks that I've dealt with so far in my micro bakery, that has been very rewarding. And that holds a lot of value for me, even though it's not a lot of income at the scale that I'm doing, which is okay. I'm really, really enjoying the community aspect, meeting folks, chatting with folks, and just sharing good bread.
All right, so you obviously picked up bread baking a lot more when the pandemic hit. So can you just share a little timeline of when you actually started thinking about opening a business and then when you actually started to sell your bread?
Sure. So early 2020 is when I really got hot and heavy into the sourdough. I think after a year, I really kind of started mastering it, which I think is a pretty long time. Like I said, I don't think it came naturally to me. It took me quite a while to feel comfortable where I could get, reproducible results. And I would have felt comfortable like giving it away or even trying to sell it. So I guess after a year, I started thinking and searching for kind of that outlet from my career, something different that I could do, completely unrelated, that could bring me some levity. So I guess that would be early to mid 2021. I actually started thinking about, well, what would this look like and what would it take? And what are the steps I would need to take to get, an LLC or a sole proprietor or, some of the business aspects that you kind of have to think about when you're starting. But then after that, it took me a whole nother year to actually pull the trigger and execute the LLC and start setting up business pages on Facebook and Instagram and ConvertKit and all that stuff. So, by the way, your series on starting a CFO was actually one of my main resources. And so I'm very thankful to you for having put that together because I took a lot of my startup tips from that series, from using ConvertKit and setting up an email list to offering kind of a giveaway to start. I thought that was a great idea, and that's how I did it. And I just wanted to commend you on that because I really got a lot out of that and used a lot of those tips when I was starting.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I actually wanted to ask you about that because I looked back. I know you've been following the podcast for a few years, and I could see that you took the mini course back in March of 2021. And then I also know that you didn't start your business until October 2022. So it took about a year and a half from when you, I guess, were starting to really think about it to the time that you finally pulled the trigger, as you said. So what do you think kind of held you back during that time? Did you think that you're going to get started selling sooner?
I think I was intimidated by just all the logistics at first. Getting the LLC, I hadn't done any research really on that. And I know you don't necessarily need that, but that was one of my priorities, I think, before I started, was to have something in place that would protect myself and my family and kind of our assets. And I didn't want to put any of that on the line. So it was just having the free time to research that process of getting an LLC. As it turns out, in Maryland, it's really not that complicated. It's actually quite simple. It took all of like 2 hours, I think. And, had I known that in 2021, maybe I would have done it sooner. But I don't know. It was just kind of how it organically happened. I was busy at work and my kids were still young. And when 22 came around, just things were a little bit more manageable and the time felt right. And so I guess that's when I just actually did it, took the plunge.
Well, you said you started by running a giveaway launch. It's something that I recommend and I've taught in the past. So can you just share what that was like?
Sure. So I had a Facebook page and an Instagram page, but I had 0 followers. So I figured that probably wouldn't be the right venue to try to offer this. So I went on actually Nextdoor and just wrote, a very simple post like, hey, I bake as a hobby. I'm looking to start a small business soon and would love to get some of my product out there and get your feedback. And I decided on offering the English muffins as the giveaway. And the reception and the feedback was excellent. I had like 20 people that wanted to try the English muffins. So off I went. I had never made that many English muffins at once before, but I figured, this is for free. And so, if they don't turn out well, then they're not paying any money. So I wouldn't feel so bad about it. And I decided for that giveaway that I would deliver. So, I got everyone's addresses and drove around one afternoon with my daughter, and we had a grand time just delivering English muffins, meeting people and kind of describing what I was about to set out to do. And after that, I opened up orders, and the next week, to my surprise, I actually got some orders. And there were folks that had sampled the English muffins. So it wasn't many. It was maybe 3 or 4 orders, but it's more than I thought that I would get. I thought I would get, if I was lucky, maybe 1 or 2. And so from there, it was, the next task was to figure out how to spread the word. And so that was really the next hurdle.
That sounds about right. You had about 20% of the giveaways convert into orders. And I'm just curious, do you know if any of those people are still customers today?
Yes, I have one who is still a regular customer. And we've developed quite a friendship of this 1.5 years since I started. And that's just the coolest thing, that from something I did kind of on a whim, it's developed this kind of personal relationship with this customer. And I have had other regular customers come and go over the 1.5 years, but that's the one that's been with me since the beginning.
Well, take me forward. You started by doing this giveaway, that kind of got you to test the waters a little bit about baking larger batches and putting yourself out there, making some sales. So how did you grow from there?
Well, I think my first task was to put together a menu. There's a couple of things that I knew I made well. There was the bagels, there's the English muffins, there was, just the regular sourdough loaf. And after the giveaway, I kind of formalized that into like a PDF document and with some pricing that I thought was fair. And then from there, I continued to post on Nextdoor, but I wasn't getting much engagement there after the giveaway. And I also started to post on local groups on Facebook. And that's really where I got a lot of the initial engagement, was from my local community Facebook group. And a lot of people, a lot of interest from, sharing some nice photography of a couple of the loaves. And that really got me started and got me some traction. And actually Reddit is the other one that I've gotten really good responses and gained a lot of customers from Reddit as well as Facebook.
Reddit, that's a first. I haven't heard anyone talk about that. So can you share a little bit about how you spread the word, I guess, through that platform?
Well, it was very similar to Facebook. I mean, you find the local community, they're called subreddits, where you can join or subscribe to that subreddit and then it shows up on your feed. And so I went to the local Montgomery County, Maryland subreddit and just made a very similar post to what I did on Facebook. And the response was actually probably even greater than I got on Facebook. I mean, the number of likes, the number of responses, the number of inquiries on how can I get some? And, how does this work? And how do I place an order was much greater on Reddit. And what I found is that the demographic on Reddit skews much younger. So not that it matters, but I just found it interesting that the customers that I was drawing from Facebook are older and the customers from Reddit are 30 something, 40 somethings. I just found that interesting. It was a pretty clear delineation between the two.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds about right. I mean, I've used Reddit many times and subreddits, but I usually think of Reddit as like more of a topic-based platform, and not necessarily a location-based platform. So it's definitely interesting to hear that you're using it, with your local subreddit. And it's definitely something that I will be looking into for my business come the next time I sell it at the end of this year. So that's a great tip. All right, so you were getting more customers through Reddit and some through Facebook and social media. And is that sort of how you carried your business forward? Did you start doing markets or anything like that?
So I haven't plunged into markets yet, and I've been doing a lot of reading on them. And from what I've gathered, once you start going to markets, you start to grow pretty quickly. And that would be wonderful, but I'm not sure. Again, trying to strike this balance between my full-time career and just doing this on the side for enjoyment. I didn't want to put that pressure on myself to one, fully stock a market table, which is quantity wise much greater than what I'm doing right now. And two, having to quote unquote deal with, the increase in popularity. Most people would jump at that opportunity. And yeah, I mean, if this is your main income, absolutely, I would encourage them to do that. But for me, I'm trying to be very deliberate about how I grow. And I do still have some room for growth, I think, just in terms of getting regular orders in. But I just haven't taken that step yet because I don't know. Again, maybe I'm just intimidated by it. And there's a lot of folks out there that are really inspiring, that are, newer to it than I am, that are just taking the plunge and doing markets and selling out and having a lot of success, which I think is awesome. I just haven't taken that plunge myself yet.
So it sounds like you're doing porch pickups at the very least, or are you just putting stuff out in front of your house and saying, come get it, or is everything pre-ordered?
Everything's pre-ordered and I have a set pickup time once a week. That's like a 2-hour window that if they'd like to place an order, I try to accommodate folks that say like, I'm going to be like an hour late. And if I don't have any plans that day, that's not a problem. But often I do have plans on that day. And so I'll tell them, let's delay your order till another time that that you can pick up inside the window. So I don't know. I've been kind of very intentional about when I'm able to offer bread, and learning how to say no was tough, but I've learned how to say no. And I don't know, it's been good. It's been a good balance between trying to accommodate but not kind of overextending myself or cheating myself out of the things that I want to do in my personal life, outside of my career and outside of this bread business.
So it sounds like you are always present when the customer picks up their order.
Yes, I meet them at the door with my little Square reader, or if they want to pay with cash, I say hello. Again, that's one of the things that was alluring about it to me. I want to interact with these people, and I think they appreciate it. It's great to meet them, and I've had some really cool interactions over the year and a half. I've had people bring me newspaper clippings that are about sourdough. I've had people share some of their jams that they make, their favorite olive oil that they like to put on my bread. That's one of the best parts of it. And so I certainly wouldn't want to cheat myself out of that experience. I actually really enjoy that part of it. So yes, I greet everyone at the door. I do set up a table, put all the bread out when it's done and packaged, and then I'll meet each one out there and collect their payment and have a little chat, and then they're on their way.
I'm just curious, like for someone who's like, oh, I can't make it within the order window. Could I come an hour later? Why wouldn't you just say, sure, let me take your payment right now and I'll put it outside and you can come pick it up at your convenience?
I certainly could do that. I happen to live in like a very wooded area with a lot of critters around. So if I were to do that, I have to figure out some system that's like either a locking cabinet or a cooler or something. I certainly could do that. My payment system, though, is I don't have like an online ordering system right now. It's actually on my to-do list for this year, 2024, to get that set up. But right now, I handle all my orders through email. So it's just kind of additional logistics that I would have to work out very manually via email. And I don't know, I just haven't been drawn to do that up until now.
So what would you say your growth has been like in the beginning? Was it about what you expected? Was it slower than you expected? Faster than you expected?
I guess overall it's slower than I expected, but again, I haven't really been like burning the midnight oil on marketing or like hitting the marketing aspect very hard. So I'm okay with how it's grown. At the beginning, I would say the first 6 months, I would get maybe 3 to 4 customers a week. And that really amounted to like a couple of loaves of bread and then whatever special I was doing that week, maybe a couple dozen. And then up to now, I'm pretty regularly getting 10 to 12 orders. And sometimes because I'm not open every weekend and in my weekly newsletter, I do put out my 4 week look ahead on when I'm going to be open, when I'm going to be closed. And I've started to have people put in like bulk orders so they can freeze it. Or if one of the specials is their favorite, I offer my specials on a rotating schedule. So I've got, I think, 5 specials now where it's one special per week in addition to the regularly available boules, baguettes, and focaccia. And if someone really likes, let's say, the bagels, I have people putting in an order for like 18, 24 bagels so that they can have a stock, to last them until the next time that I offer them. That's pretty cool to see that, where folks like my product so much that they feel the need to stock up, before the next round of that special comes around.
So do you currently put a limit on weekly orders? Like at some point, do you sell out?
I do. So for a long time, I guess there's been kind of 2 phases of that. In the beginning, I was baking just with Dutch ovens in like our kitchen conventional oven. And so from that regard, I bake everything morning of pickup. And so from that regard, I only had so many hours and I could only do 2 boules at a time. And each round of boules took like 50 minutes. And so, yeah, I can only take orders for like 8 of them because if I wake up at 3 a.m. to start baking, then that gets me till like 7 a.m. And then I had to leave time to also bake whatever special I was doing that week. So yes, at the beginning, my limits were lower. Since then, I've invested in a bread oven and that's expanded my capacity. So the bottleneck was never my ability to like mix the dough or store the dough. It was my ability to bake it. And so now I can do 12 boules at a time. And so there's really no limit. I mean, I haven't gotten any orders above 20. So that's really only 2 shifts in the oven or 2 bake cycles in the oven, and everything bakes a lot faster in there. So I would say right now, I don't have any limits on the boules or the baguettes or the focaccia, but I do have a limit on the specials because those are much more labor intensive. I'm not really interested in, rolling dough and rolling cinnamon rolls or laminating croissants, for 8 hours that morning. So that's just a personal choice that I certainly could do it, but I just choose not to do it that way. So I'll usually limit the specials to like 6 or 8 dozen, depending on the product, just because I know that's kind of my personal limit on how much energy I'll have in the morning to do it.
Now, you mentioned that you have a weekly newsletter that you send out. And is that how you get most of your customers on a week-to-week basis?
Yes. So that's a good point because I would say that the social media posts, what that does is that converts those people into subscribers to the newsletter. And so I'm not necessarily getting orders directly from the social media posts, but I am getting a lot of email newsletter subscribers. And by this point, people know my schedule. It's a weekly, orders are due by Thursday, pick up on Sunday morning. But I find that I really don't get many, if any, orders for that week until I hit send on that newsletter. As soon as that newsletter goes out, the orders start coming in. So I would say the newsletter is the biggest factor for actually getting orders in.
And I think you said you use ConvertKit for it?
Yes.
So about how many people are currently on your email list?
I have about 300 right now, which doesn't sound like a lot, but I've actually gone through periodically and removed people that I see that are not engaging or opening the emails. I'll go out and kind of clear the list periodically, maybe remove 10 or 12 people quarterly, maybe. And so I guess in terms of total subscribers, that's kind of suppressed the total, but I'd rather have a higher engagement with a shorter list than have a really long list with like a very low percentage of engagement.
Yeah, and that is recommended to do as well, that you should be removing inactive subscribers. And I'm sure that 300 will sound like quite a lot to a lot of the listeners on here. And that is actually quite a lot and definitely enough to sustain a pretty healthy small business. So you send out to about 300, and then about how many orders are you getting on a weekly basis today?
I would say I'm getting about 10 to 12 on a weekly basis. It depends on the special. Some specials are more popular and I'll get more orders that week. And I found that it's usually the special that brings the customers. And they'll just happen to order, a bowl or a couple baguettes along with their special order, which is not the way that I thought it would go, David. I thought the sourdough bowls would be the draw, but in fact, it's been the specials that have been the draw, which has been a surprise to me. All my products, by the way, are sourdough based. I don't use any commercial yeast. The English muffins are, in my humble opinion, the best that I've had. And then the bagels as well. I mean, I think people really enjoy the depth of flavor that the sourdough brings. And they're not used to seeing a sourdough bagel or a sourdough English muffin or even a sourdough croissant. And I've gotten a lot of comments on just how surprised they are at how good and I've never had anything this good. And that's really rewarding to get comments like that.
So it sounds like most of your customers are recurring.
I wouldn't say most. I would say, I don't know, maybe 50%. Well, I meant less than that. I would say maybe 33%. A third of the customers are, I would say, recurring. But they cycle in and out. I've had customers that have been, weekly regulars for like a 4-month span and they kind of disappear, for whatever reason. I certainly don't hold it against anyone. I know that life gets busy and situations change, people move and whatever is going on in their lives prevents them from ordering. So I don't take any offense to it. But I would say I get a pretty good amount of new people on a weekly basis, just based on those social media posts. And I've had some people that maybe have been a newsletter subscriber for a year and are just, a year later getting around to actually placing an order. And so I always thank them, for being a loyal subscriber and for reading, my newsletters. And that's really rewarding too, when someone's been engaged for that long and just hasn't gotten a chance to order for whatever reason. And then they finally get around to it. That's pretty cool.
That's all pretty typical. And I'm just curious, with your emails, you're sending out to 300. What is your open rate looking like?
It's usually in the low 60s, like 61, 62%.
Okay, so that's an extremely high open rate. So you're getting a lot of engagement from your emails. And what are you writing in those emails?
So I use the newsletter almost like a journal. Just what I've been working on, some recipes I've been testing, and some failures. I've been kind of keeping folks up to date on when I get new equipment, like the new oven, the new full-size refrigerator that I use for proofing, the new 20-quart mixer that I got. And I always thank them, it's them that makes it possible by buying my bread to help me to, one, make my life easier in the bakery, and two, just expand, from that aspect. Because before I got some of these pieces of equipment, I was totally capped out. Like I said, I only had so many hours in the day, in the morning to bake before pickups, and getting some of this equipment has really helped me expand with the same time limitation, which has been really awesome.
Well, I'm just thinking about your numbers here, and not to get too much into the weeds of it, but, with your subscriber base, if you get about 12 orders a week, then we'd say that's about a 4% conversion rate that you have on, converting an email into an order, which is actually very typical. That's a normal number for email marketing. Typically with social media, it would be significantly lower than that, even though maybe 12 out of 300 doesn't sound like a big number to people. That's actually pretty good. But you're getting 60% open rate, which is extremely high. We'd be looking more at like the 20 to 30% range of something that's typical. So that's kind of telling me that people really like following you. They really like getting your emails, and that you probably could be having more customers. But I'm wondering maybe if it's just the fact that you have very specific limited windows of, when you sell your bread, when they can pick it up. That's probably significantly limiting your business. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, 100%. I think that's exactly what's going on, because I've gotten several messages saying, I'd love to try your bread, but I can't make it in that window, or I'm always out of town, when you offer on Sundays, or I've gotten suggestions like, wouldn't it be better if you did it on Saturdays so that people can have their stuff, for brunch on Sunday? And all those things are true, but this is just what kind of fits into my lifestyle right now. And so I've kind of just offered it up to, whoever can come, and whoever can't. And again, I'm not right now at this phase of my life, I'm not really interested in exponential growth of the business. I'm just interested in making bread for people and having them enjoy it. So whoever can make it, that's great. And whoever can't, hopefully they can find a time, sometime soon to come try it.
Yeah, well, I always say, it's your business. You get to make the rules. And I think it's great that you have sort of intentionally found what works well for you. And I know that's something that you wanted to talk about in this interview, is just sort of how you have intentionally tried to keep it small. But I also know you mentioned to me that one of the struggles you've had is sometimes finding the balance between your career and your bakery. So how have you sort of found that balance as you've grown?
Well, I think I've had to be very intentional about setting boundaries. I'm very deliberate about when I do and when I don't think about or work on, the bread stuff. I do kind of have desk hours, quote unquote, for my career, but over the years, I've gotten into a position of leadership where, it never really ends. The day never really ends from my career perspective. So there are weeks that get busy where I try to send out my newsletter on Mondays, but there's weeks where I don't get around to it till like Wednesday night, and my order deadline is Thursday. And so I'll just know that week that I'm just going to have a couple of orders this week, which is fine. And I've gotten to the point where I'm just okay with that, because obviously the career is priority for me. It's my main income. Like I said, it provides us all of our health benefits and the stability for kind of our lifestyle. And so that has been and always will be, I think, the priority. And the micro bakery, it just fits in where it can. There are some times where I do force it and I'm tired on a particular Saturday morning when it's mixed day and I've had a long week, with my career, and I've taken the orders and I've committed to these people to make their bread. So I'm going to do it. But once I get down here in the bakery and start mixing and start putting my hands in the dough, that all goes away. I mean, it's just such a therapeutic thing for me. And that's really how I've used it, is just kind of an escape from the stresses of my career and some time for me where I can get some music going and just get into a zone where it's just muscle memory for me now. So I'm able to turn my brain off and do what I do down here in the bakery. And it's just really one of the things that I love right now.
Yeah, you mentioning the baking hours, that's just comes with the territory. So what does your bake day schedule look like?
My bake weekend. So the schedule really starts on, I would say, Thursday night, where I'll take my little bit of starter that I have left from the last week's bake. I'll take that out of the refrigerator and just put it on the counter to wake up overnight. And then the next morning, I'll feed it. So that would be Friday morning. I feed it, go to work that day, come home in the evening, have dinner with my family. And then before I go to bed, I'll feed it again. And that's really the bulk feed, because when you're baking at scale, you have to have a lot of starter. So on Friday evening is where I will feed it to get all the starter that I will need for the order load that weekend. And then that will rise overnight. And then by the time I wake up in the morning, it's ready to be used. And I'll usually wake up, depending on how tired I am, either 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. on Saturday, just to get an early start, especially if we have like a family activity that afternoon that I want to get to. I want to make sure that my mixing is done, by noon. So I'll get up early and mix all the doughs, and then let them ferment on the counter, do my folding and all the steps that come along with your typical sourdough process. And then my goal is usually to have everything in baskets or in their buckets, in their proofing buckets, into the refrigerator for the overnight fermentation by noon or 1 o'clock, so that I can have the afternoon to run errands or mow the lawn or, whatever else I have to do that I have going on. So that's Saturday morning. And then on Sunday morning, that's the early day. My alarm goes off at 3 so that I can get down here to preheat the bread oven. That takes about 2 hours to preheat. So if I turn it on at 3 a.m., that means it's ready to bake at 5 a.m. And so while that is preheating, that's when I'm doing my heavy labor on the special for that week. So if it's bagels, I'm partitioning them out to the right weight for each bagel, and then you roll them and then you shape them. And those need a couple of hours to proof. So after shaping the special, I'll set those on the counter, and those do their final proof while I'm launching the loaves or the boules into the oven. Those will bake for like half an hour or an hour, hour and a half, depending on how many shifts I need to do. And then by the time those are done, the bagels are proofed. They're ready to go into the boil. I'll have the boil set up. I'll start boiling my first batch of bagels, and then into the oven they go. And then during that time, when the specials are baking, is when the boules are cooling, because they have to cool, I would say, for a good 3 hours before they're ready to be packaged. The specials are smaller, so those can cool in like an hour or so. if you package too soon, you get a lot of condensation in the bags and stuff. And not to get too much into the weeds of things, but that's just kind of my process. Everything's kind of timed just so in relation to everything else I have to do that morning to make sure that everything is ready to get set out on the table by like 10:45 in case somebody shows up early, which does happen on occasion. So yeah, it's a pretty full weekend.
Well, considering how labor intensive it all is, where does your pricing land? What did you start out with and where is it now?
When I started, I was obviously concerned about overpricing and driving, scaring people away. So when I started, my bowls were priced at $8 each for the plain. And then I was doing some inclusions at the time that I priced, I think, at $11, like $3 more than the plain. And then when I first started, my only specials were bagels and English muffins. And for the English muffins, I believe I was doing $10 for a half dozen. And for bagels, I was doing $12 for a half dozen. Once the order volume started to go up, I just very quickly realized that this is way too much work for what I'm charging. And by the way, ingredient costs were going up a lot at the time as well. I think flour costs were at an all-time high in 2023, I think it was, and right in the heart of the first year of my business. So because of all those things, I did make the choice to increase my prices about a year in. So I bumped the bowls up to $10, the inclusion bowls to $13, and then everything else was kind of just like a 20% increase. Like the bagels, I increased to $15, and the English muffins, I increased first to $12 and then to $13. It just got to a point where it just felt right. If I felt that it was worth it to do all the effort, be able to justify all the effort that I was putting into it. Again, this is not really a super for-profit type endeavor. It's really just for the love and for the passion of doing it and for sharing the bread with people. And it's really to cover costs for the ingredients, for the equipment, for the energy bill, that this giant oven takes to fire up. And I really look at it more of a self-sustaining hobby than I do, an income generator.
Well, I have to ask you because I know, like you've been saying, this is not about the money. And, want to keep your full-time job. You want this to be intentionally small. But it's over 3 years ago now that you reached out to me when you signed up for the mini course. And you were specifically concerned about your state sales limit. Now, I know Maryland at the time had only a $25,000 sales limit, so that's quite low. But I was just curious, what were your concerns about that at the time? Have those changed at all? Obviously, I know that Maryland has increased their sales limit since then, but I was just wondering about that because it did seem like the amount of money that you were going to make was a concern, at least at one point in time.
I think that was just more of an exploratory time. I would be lying if I said I've never thought about, if this could be a sustainable career. It's just kind of human nature to wonder and to see if it's viable. I think just over the years, I've come to the realization that it's not. I think the limit now is 50,000. There was a law change, I think last year, that raised it to 50,000. And it's just, even then, it wouldn't be a viable option for me to have this as my sole income. Our lifestyle, the area we live in is unfortunately very expensive. And, my full-time career is like integral to making sure that we can kind of maintain our lifestyle here. So I think just with that reality and bread making being extremely labor intensive, I think this year I'm projecting to bring in like maybe $9,000 or $10,000 in sales. And it's a lot of work for that little income. So I think I've just learned through the process that it's not for me and for our situation. It's not really a viable full-time endeavor, I don't think.
Now, along those lines, I remember you saying that you started out using Dutch ovens. So what have you done in terms of equipment, or how have you, maybe improved your efficiencies as you've expanded your production?
It's interesting because even back then when I was doing Dutch ovens, that wasn't my bottleneck. It was my bottleneck, but my bigger bottleneck was my mixer. I just had like a little KitchenAid countertop mixer. And to mix 8 loaves, I had to do 4 batches in this mixer. So the first piece of equipment and the last I purchased that I thought would make a big difference was the mixer. I got a 20-quart mixer, and it did. It made a huge difference. I could mix all my loaves in one batch. I think I've tried up to 14 loaves, and it just barely fits in there. So if I ever get a week, I've had a couple of weeks with more than 14 loaves where I've had to do 2 batches, but That was like an immediate bump in efficiency, which was awesome for not really a large investment. I think it was like $700 or something. It was really not a large investment, I don't think.
All right, so you got the mixer, and then at that point, were the Dutch ovens your bottleneck?
Yes, the Dutch ovens became my bottleneck. And I started researching like the Rothko or the Simply Bread or the Rackmaster and all those, all the big names that are kind of in this micro bakery, home bakery space. And the cost of those just made my eyes pop. I mean, it's a big investment. Even the Rothko, I think, is on the low end. And that oven is, I think, $4,000+ And I wasn't getting many orders at the time, and I wasn't really interested in investing that much at the time. But I would say about a year in, the first year, I brought in about that much. It was maybe like $4,500. And I was like, hey, you know what? This was the point of this. It was supposed to be a self-funding hobby, and I've made the money now to purchase this oven. And so I took the plunge. And I actually purchased a Nero. It's called the Nero 400. It's kind of like an equivalent to the Rothko. The Rothko have a very long lead time. I think they're very popular, and you have to order it like months in advance. And the Nero was much more readily available. So I just ended up going in that direction. It's about the same cost and has all the same features and, whatever. So yeah, about a year in, I decided to stop doing the Dutch oven shuffle and went for the bread oven. And I knew going into it that it was going to have a learning curve. It's a different process, different timing, different temperatures, just different way of baking. You're launching 12 loaves at a time as opposed to carefully placing one at a time into a Dutch oven so you don't burn your wrists. It was a huge upgrade, and it's made my bake mornings just much less stressful. So that was a big improvement. After that, my bottleneck then became the cold proofing capacity. So when you cold proof, you put everything in the refrigerator. And so the last piece of equipment that I got was a full-size refrigerator. It's all refrigerator. It sits right next to my oven, and I can fit everything in there without issue. And it's just right here in the bakery, which has been a great improvement also.
So you are doing all of your baking in the basement of your house, not in your main kitchen?
Correct. So we have a finished basement, and it's great because we've had a sink down here already. And I just happen to have 240 power down here for the oven, which I think I was just lucky from the previous owner. So it's really worked out really well where I kind of have everything I need down here. I've already got eyes on my next bottleneck, which is really my counter space where, once everything is shaped and proofing, I'm really short on counter space to be able to take things out of the oven, let them cool. So it's interesting because, like I've described, each piece of new equipment has been a huge improvement, but it makes another bottleneck float to the top. And it's been kind of a fun, iterative process in that regard, and trying to figure out what's the best way to tackle this now new bottleneck and try to do it economically. Because again, this is not a business that brings in a lot of money. I'm trying to keep things small scale and kind of live within the means of the business itself.
Oh, I did see on your social media another piece of equipment you didn't mention there, which is the sheeter.
Yes. So it's actually been a great addition. I do use it for the English muffins and for the cinnamon rolls. But I think the biggest development from that piece of equipment was it enabled me to really think about doing croissants at scale. I've had now 2 weeks where I've been able to offer the croissants, and each of those weeks has been an adventure. Because of all the products, the croissants are far and away the most labor intensive. But that piece of equipment, I think, has injected, the most innovation into what I do, just by changing the process on a couple of things and really allowing me to start to explore, laminated dough, laminated pastry. Very exciting.
Well, I do have to ask about what I would say looks like your most interesting piece of equipment that I see in your social media feed, which is your bread slicer.
Oh, how could I have forgotten to mention that? So we were in Miami last summer, just for our summer vacation, and we found a bakery nearby. So I bought a loaf, and they asked me if I wanted it sliced. I was like, yeah, I would love to have it sliced. I was expecting the guy to pull out like a big bread knife and slice it by hand, but he tossed it in this machine. And it made perfect slices in a matter of like 10 seconds. And I was like, that's probably the coolest thing I've ever seen that's bread related. So I took a picture of it, and I started researching, what this thing is and how can I get one or whatever. And, I was expecting it would probably be a splurge, like maybe $1,000 or something. These things are like $10,000 new. And I was just blown away. I was like, well, that's never going to happen. So I don't know. I guess a few months went by, and I do frequent a local auction, kind of a restaurant auction website, just for fun, just to see what's available. And wouldn't you know it, one of these bread slicers popped up. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have to have it. I put in my bid, not really expecting anything out of it. I put in a pretty low bid, and I was just like, we'll see what happens. And the bid stood. And so I ended up winning the bread slicer off of this auction. So I convinced my brother to grab his truck and meet me at this place, and expecting it to be pretty heavy. I underestimated how heavy it is. The two of us could barely lift it. So somehow we got it on the truck, and then we got it to my house. And then the next trick was to get it down to the basement, down the flight of stairs. So our backs hurt, I would say, for a few days after that. But we got it down here and cleaned it up and tested it out, and it works like a dream. And it's just been kind of one of those really cool gadgets that I probably should highlight more, I think, on my social media, because it's so unique. I think it's pretty unique to my scale of bakery, but the customers love it. They love to get their bread sliced. And I'm happy to be able to offer that service because I have this machine, and it's been a wild ride with this thing. It's a beast. Like I said, it weighs a ton. It's loud. It's ugly, but it's pretty fun.
I'm just thinking about, how labor intensive bread is. You've obviously got this career and you have a family. Do you feel like having this whole bread making hobby turned business has added a lot of stress to your life, has taken away from the amount of time you could spend with your family?
I would say no, it has not added stress. There's been moments of stress where I'm running tight on time and I'm kind of scurrying about the morning of. But I think the reason I've continued to do it is that it's given me perspective, meaning that my full-time career, I would say, is very stressful. And this is something that I have control over it. And I have control over every aspect of it. And the mornings of mixing, my kids will usually come down to the basement and, watch a cartoon, or they'll play with their toys kind of in the background. And we kind of coexist in the space. And that's kind of how we spend time together. And we'll interact, of course, while I'm mixing, and we got music going. And so it's just kind of become a part of our family culture where, Saturday morning, Dad's making bread. And what's so special this week? That means we're going to have it for breakfast tomorrow. And it's kind of become ingrained in our weekend routine, which I think has been fun. Yes, it's a lot of work, but my career is based on kind of long time frames. In architecture, you design something and you've got to wait a year, sometimes 2-3 years to see a project to completion. Whereas this, in a single weekend from start to finish, I'm seeing the result, and I'm seeing the smile on people's faces when I hand it over, and getting the feedback that I get, that, the bagels last week were amazing. And the bread bakery has just been my chance to do a small thing my way. And that's really just been super valuable to me.
One thing that you mentioned to me is that hearing a lot of guests on the podcast talk about, taking their business full time, being able to invest their all into their business has made you feel like, maybe you're not making the most of your business. Can you just elaborate on that and that feeling and what you meant by that?
Well, I think, when I hear about all the success stories, which is amazing to hear, these folks that have started very small like I am now and have created either this social media influencer type presence or have gotten to the goal of opening a brick and mortar, it kind of makes you doubt yourself, I think, when others are taking this so far and you've still kind of stayed in this small, very small scale type situation, which, as I've said, is kind of what I want it to be. But I don't know. It's just, I feel like there's always this external pressure, whether it's social media. I really don't know what the cause is, but there's this little voice, inside you that says, well, if the demand is there, why wouldn't you take it further? Are you selling yourself short? Or maybe this is a viable career, and it's just kind of makes you question what you're doing. And I think part of it is just kind of self-validating and saying it doesn't have to be this giant thing that grows into a national corporation or whatever it wants to be. It's just, this is what's right for me right now. And this is right now. 3 years from now, who knows? But right now, this is what fits into my lifestyle, into my family's lifestyle. And it brings me joy at the scale that it is now. So it's okay to keep it small. There have been guests on the show before that are similar, which I've appreciated hearing, because that's kind of reassuring from that regard, that, again, it's okay to stay small. And if this is what's right for you, then it's right.
Yeah, as you're talking, it's like I'm stepping back into episode 41 with Eric Sorensen. He said the exact same thing, also a fellow bread baker. So I was just wondering, like sometimes people get competitive and they want to just grow it because they can. So what do you feel like has kept you grounded in sticking to keeping everything small?
Well, I would say just by nature of not needing for it to grow. I've got a steady income in my full-time career. And I think a lot of times when folks are frustrated with their career or looking for just something else to, another way to take the trajectory of their lives, that if they had got an opportunity to grow their bread business and make it a full-time thing, then that's what makes sense for them. And that's awesome. Again, I'm always super inspired by those people. And it's just right now in my phase of life, it just doesn't make sense to grow this thing. I think it could grow, for the record. I think if I started doing markets and really upped my marketing and upped my social media interaction, it really could grow. And I would obviously need to change like this very narrow window once a week that I would offer it. But I think I'm just not ready to do that yet. And I don't know, like I said, like I keep saying, it's what works for me right now.
Well, yeah, I mean, based on the engagement that you're getting on emails alone, I would say you probably could grow it quite a lot more than you currently have it. But I also think you would agree that even though you're keeping it smaller, like you are a very successful business. It's exactly what you want it to be and it's fulfilling your needs. So it's just as much of a success as any other guest that I've had on the podcast, in my opinion. Now, as you look ahead, where do you see this going? I know you're not going to be ramping up super fast, but if you could look down the line 2, 3, maybe 5 years, what are your goals?
Well, I think I am eventually going to dip my toes into the farmer's market arena. I've been thinking about it for a while. I think it will eventually happen. I actually applied to, it wasn't a regular market. It was like a seasonal market, just a one-time seasonal market that happened once per season. And I actually didn't get accepted to it. I guess they had another baker at that one already, so they didn't have space for me. So from that regard, I've kind of started already down that path, and I think eventually I'll get there. I just don't know if that means when I do that I'll stop taking pre-orders and only do that, or if I'll do the farmers markets like just kind of seasonally or infrequently and continue the pre-order type system that I have now. I haven't quite decided that yet, but I just know that once I go to markets that it's going to ramp up for me. And so I just want to make sure that I'm, mentally prepared for when that happens and physically that I can do it. And I think I have all the equipment that I need to do it now. So I think I'm in a good place to maybe actually start considering that, if not this year, maybe next year.
Now, before we hop off, I'm just thinking about somebody who maybe is in a similar position to where you were a couple of years ago. They have a full-time career that they really enjoy. They don't want to leave that, but they're thinking about starting a cottage food business. Do you have any advice for someone like that?
I think, again, it's wanting to let, folks that are in my situation that are trying to juggle two things that might be happy in their career or their career offers them a lot that it's hard to walk away from, that you can still do something that you're passionate about outside of your career, whether it's bread, whether it's, some other type of cottage food type of business, that there's space for it. You may have to carve out space for it, but there is space for it. And so I would just encourage those types of people to go for it. I think this little bakery that I've built has brought me a lot of joy, and it offers so much more than the income. It offers me confidence. It offers me validation. It offers me a lot. And I'm really glad that I took the step to do this.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that with us today. Now, if somebody would like to learn more about you, where can they find you or how can they reach out?
The best way, I guess, is Facebook and Instagram. So it's at Rise Artisan Sourdough on both platforms. And then you can find a link to my website that has my menu if you're curious about how that looks. And yeah, I would just love to get more interaction on my social media and meet more people out there in the cottage food industry that we can compare notes and share war stories. And yeah, I would love to hear from folks.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing with us today.
My pleasure, David. It was fun.
That wraps up another episode of the Forager Podcast. For more information about this episode, go to forager.com/podcast/116. And if you're enjoying this podcast, please take a quick moment right now and leave me a review on Apple Podcasts. It doesn't have to be a long review, but it's truly the best way to support this show and will help others like you find this podcast. And finally, if you're thinking about selling your own homemade food, check out my free mini course where I walk you through the steps you need to take to get a cottage food business off the ground. To get the course, go to cottagefoodcourse.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.